Hey everybody. So I'm just making a quick video to show this patch that I've been working on today. So I came across something that, at least to me, sounds a little bit like a quickly, strongly bowed cello or something similar. With a little bit of reverb, it sounds a bit more convincing. So let me explain the way I've patched this up. I have a first of all, I have a noise source going into the Collide 4, into the preamp and filter section, where I have the filter center a little bit low, maybe quarter of the way up, the width about in the middle, the gain. So I have the gain switch up here set to -10 and then turn it up a bit. Resonance not up too high. That then is going out into this Lublin Pingable VCA, which is triggered by just pressing a key on my key step, and then that goes into the waveguide, into the X. The output of the X channel is going into the Y, and then that Y output is going to what you hear. So a few other things going on. I have the pitch link between the X and the Y on the analog waveguide. It's getting pitch from the keyboard, and then I'm also sending that to the Collide 4 so that the filter there tracks the pitch as well. I have the low pass filter and feedback links off on the analog waveguide. And as you can see, the X settings are a little bit more than half, whereas the Y, I've slightly bumped up the filter a little bit and the feedback up slightly more. And then I've got this send from the X channel going up here into the FM modulation, which I've turned up a fair amount, pretty much all the way. And so I find this sound is fairly useful over maybe about 2 octaves. When you get too high, it no longer has that kind of bowed sounding quality. I mean, it still could be a sound that you would use for something, but I just find that the character changes quite a bit. If you go lower, it starts to get a little bit muddy. So somewhere in here is kind of the sweet spot for it. Again, with some reverb. So I think I'm just going to turn the reverb on and off throughout the video, and I'll just put a cue on screen letting you know when it's on. So I just kind of stumbled on this sound when I was patching and tweaking things, and then I kept tweaking and I kind of lost it. It took me quite a while to get back to it. So the impression that I had in my first video turned out to be correct, which is this module, it's quite temperamental. I mean, I don't say that in a bad way because it's capable of a lot, but you know, if you just twist something a little bit, especially in combination with some other small change you've made, you might get into completely new territory and kind of lose a sound that you were trying to work on. So maybe a good idea would be, while you're patching, just take plenty of pictures, so in case something goes wrong, you might be able to get back to the sound that you wanted to keep. Now, if you're not familiar with the Lublin, it has this ping input where you can trigger it, and it has a built-in really short and snappy envelope. Actually has several settings. Right now I have it set to the shortest setting, but we can change that to the middle one and listen to that. So you're going to hear that add some length to the sound. I think it still sounds pretty good. But if we change to the longest one, it turns into quite a different sound, and again it's fairly noisy at the upper range there, and kind of muddy at the bottom. Of course, if you don't have a Lublin, I'm sure you can replicate this with another VCA and just feed it a very snappy envelope. Now let's talk about this FM modulation that I have going on here from the X send. It seems to be responsible for a lot of the character of the sound. Let me take it out. You'll hear, well, you know, I mean, it still sounds kind of like some kind of string, but with that FM modulation, it just has more texture. It's a little hard to describe, but there's something to my ear a little more realistic about it. Like the kind of noise you would get from the friction of the bow rubbing against the string. I'm not saying I intentionally did that in order to model that aspect, but it was just kind of a happy accident, and I think that's the effect that it sounds like it has to me, at least. So let's change some of the parameters around a little bit and see how that affects the sound. So it doesn't always have such a huge effect, but even some little changes can really make a big difference in how the sound is perceived subjectively. So like turning up the feedback on the Y, so it increases the decay, and although I suppose you wouldn't say that the sound is so radically different, to me at least, maybe you agree if you listen kind of carefully, it seems to have lost something of the character it had before. Or maybe that character is still there, but just by extending the sound, it just gives a different impression to the ear, and I just feel like that bowed quality is kind of lost in there somehow. So now let's try that on the X side. Well, obviously that's way too much. As you can see, the changes there are a little bit more dramatic. And so here, we're hearing kind of more of a twangy sound, which again, it might be something that you want, but it's certainly different from the initial impression of the sound I had earlier. So putting everything back to about where it was, we have this sweet spot where it has a sense of vibration, but it's not drawn out too long. It's just enough to give that impression of, like, as I said, a quickly bowed cello. Although maybe you disagree, maybe you think it sounds like something else. If that's the case, leave a comment. Let me know what you think it sounds like. And let me know if you have some ideas for tweaking it in different directions. By the way, you might notice that I have the dry wet all the way up on the X channel, but only halfway up on the Y. So let's listen to what happens if I turn that all the way up. Again, it's not so radically different, but I feel like it's losing a little bit of that gritty, frictiony character that the FM modulation is giving. Now, another thing I experimented with was modulating the feedback on the X channel using the velocity from the key step 37. So let me see if I can get that to work about the same way right now. So I'm going to turn the feedback knob way down here on the X side, and then I found that it doesn't take too much distance on this attenuverter, even though the mod output of the key step is only set to 5 volts. So here's a softly played note, and then a more forcefully played note. But again, you really have to adjust this very carefully, because otherwise it's going too high, and then it's getting that kind of twangy sound that disrupts that impression of something being bowed. It's a little bit better, I think. If we turn down the Y filter here, well, that sounds pretty good actually. I think it's almost like maybe holding down the strings to kind of mute them a little bit. But if you just turn it down on the X, it's really dramatically different. It's more like a hammered string kind of sound, like a simulation of a piano maybe. So finally, let me just show you a little bit what happens when we play with the rotation knob on this patch. So you can see the results are quite noisy, and most of them you might not consider so useful. Gets rather unpredictable. And the issue here is the X is routed directly into the Y. So I think generally, if you're doing that, you probably want to keep that rotation close to 0. I mean, unless you just want really noisy results, of course. Just seems like it allows the feedback to get a little bit more out of control, I guess. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See you next time.